Yes, these things are true. It is Confederacy does largely stand for slavery, and I think Mia's made a couple of important points we need to elaborate on. But before I do that, make sure I'm not cutting anybody else off in that group. Alice, okay. Remember, one of the keys is that the feelings about slavery intensify between 1800 and 1860. Well, shouldn't say that. They really start to intensify between 1840 and 1860, maybe 1830 and 1860, because they Southerners abandon this idea that it's a necessary evil, and what are we going to do? It's the way things are. We have to live with it. Sorry, I don't know why I'm yawning. I had a great night's sleep. But the attitude moves towards it's a moral good, okay? And it's the right way that humans should live and interact and all that stuff. What was I going to say? So there's that, right? But what I want to introduce this word into, and I've kind of tiptoed around it or talked a little bit around it in principle or in concept anyway, and that is the South is paranoid. Don't freak. The South is terrified that slavery is going to be taken away by all these firebrand northern abolitionists. And so what's the new thing that the Southerners add to the slavery question in this period? What do they use to try to retain slavery? What do they see as the thing, as their lifeline, as slavery's lifeline? What's going on in the country elsewhere? The big W word. Come on, even if this isn't your question, this is something everyone should know. Emily, you're lighting up. Are you on mute?
No, I'm trying to find it in my notes. I'm trying to look for it.
I gave it away by saying the big W word. What is? Not north, not south, not east, but
westward expansion.
Yeah. And the debate over what about westward expansion is so crucial to the Southerners and eventually to the Confederacy.
That slavery continues on even in the West, because most laws didn't specifically say that slavery can continue on past that certain line.
Right.
So they felt threatened that their way of life will eventually die out.
Yeah, it'll be strangled in its little southeastern corner, and that the lifeline is to keep it going by having more states come in that are slave states, because after all, they need to bolster their slavery interest in the House of Representatives. Okay, and the Senate too. If you come in as a slave state, you got two slave state senators, and that's a very important thing. But really, it's about the House of Representatives, because that's where you get Southerners and slave states get this tremendous bonus of the 3/5 clause. Okay, and by the way, let me just expand this question a little bit by saying, you also think about how the South, how it becomes the Confederacy is fundamentally different from the North in economic terms, industrial, non-industrial. That explains a whole lot, right, of how attitudes develop, and then what happens during the Civil War. Okay. All right. What were the international ramifications of the Civil War? Schuyler's here. Who else is here from this group? I guess it's you, Schuyler. Yeah.
So obviously with the Civil War, the country's divided. So that's a huge issue. After the Civil War, the Southern economy was in shambles, and the South was just in shambles to begin with. Another big ramification was the freedom of slaves, which when they escaped to the North, they technically weren't free yet because most of them lived in camps and worked for the Northern armies. So that's kind of rough to begin with. In
Mhm.
the South, working with slaves worked for the armies, but were still considered property. So even with the announcement that slaves were free peoples, they weren't free because they were still in the South, and the South wasn't listening to the North. So it's just a clash of butting heads.
Mhm. What else? What were the sort of diplomatic problems and transatlantic problems, if you will?
I do remember that cotton was a very big staple that most countries relied on from the Americas to fuel their industries and make their goods. So when we were at war and their production really dropped because, you know, they're fighting a war, that caused a lot of distress in those other countries that they weren't getting that cotton that they needed. And even though that the materials and goods were like increasing production in the North, the South was actually decreasing in production by a significant margin.
Yeah.
So just by the amount of production alone, they thought the North was going to win. But keep in mind that the wars were just like a little, they were the wars helped determine it, but it was unsure for a long time.
Yeah, it was unsure for a long time, and the British are watching with a wary eye, saying, "Oh, what are we going to do if we can't get cotton at the price we want anymore, or more immediately that the supply of cotton is going to be slowed down and interrupted by the war, which of course it is. But maybe it's something that we don't talk about enough. It's just going through my head. I don't know why. The world's greatest night's sleep, and now I can't think straight. Oh, if the Southern economy completely collapses for all kinds of, well, for the main reason of the war, but also if slavery is taken away and the whole economy collapses, post-war cotton might be a real problem. Now, this is the reason I'm saying this. Whenever you have an economic system where that's based largely on, or I should say overwhelmingly on, one cash crop, which of course the Confederacy does. Now it's not just cotton, it's tobacco and sugar and rice, but within each region, right? In Virginia, tobacco, North Carolina, tobacco, cotton, but in each region, it relies solely on one commodity, maybe two. Okay, so the Southern economy is artificial. It's not very naturally diverse. The North has got all kinds of things going on: farming and manufacturing and small businesses and banking and things like that. And the South has just the tiny top of elites profiting off the cotton, and then this massive peasant and slave economy, white peasants and black slaves. So that's very fragile. Right? Almost all countries that fall into this trap of being overly agricultural at a time when the rest of the world, the rest of the industrial world anyway, is industrializing and diversifying, means that if anything goes wrong, if there's a tobacco weevil that takes over Virginia, then all of a sudden the economy crashes. So southern foreign countries realize that the South has this economic problem because, sorry, I'm turning this into lecture, didn't mean to. Ever since the 18th century, economists had been arguing that one of the reasons that lots of Northern European countries are relatively economically stable is because their economic base is very broad and very diverse. So the Netherlands, which has 5 people in it from one end to the other, is tiny, is very prosperous for the most part because the economy is so diverse and they produce so many different things. England has a long-standing tradition of staying pretty stable and not collapsing economically, whereas large single crop countries like the Ukraine and areas in what we now think of the Russian wheat basket, European wheat basket, that things can go really wrong really quickly if there's a problem with the crop. So the idea of the Lordy, what's going to happen with cotton and tobacco and to some degree sugar after the war is what's really causing sleepless nights for big merchants in Britain, especially. On the other hand, I have to say we shouldn't exaggerate that too much, because Britain is also looking at this and saying this is a way to increase our imperial strength in Egypt and in India, because Egypt is where a lot of cotton comes from, and technically not a British possession, but certainly under British influence. And India is a British possession, and cotton comes from there too. So some people in Britain see the eventual collapse of the South, or what they think is going to be a collapse of the South, a good thing for the British Empire. Okay, because it means by necessity, because the Lancashire cotton mills can't stop going, they're making zillions, the cotton production out of these other places will come out tremendously. Still, it's very dicey. It's not a comfortable situation for any country. And of course, you have massive numbers of French abolitionists and English abolitionists, British abolitionists been calling for the end of slavery for 100 years. So the British government has this problem of, well, we have Lancashire cotton textiles need cotton, but we have all these rich aristocrats who pay tons in land taxes, who have, and they say this literally in Parliament, whose wives are going around refusing sugar in their tea because they refuse slave-based sugar. They were called the anti-saccharides. They were in the late 18th century, early 19th century. So for other countries, the economic, the precarious nature of the South, of the economy in the South, is a real worry. Number 3, Brandon McKenzie. Brennan's here, yeah. Josh came in. Is Cassie here? Yeah. Oh, wow. We have almost a full boat for how and why did slavery end in the United States. Whoa. Kenzie, before drafting the American Kenzie's written, before drafting of the Emancipation Proclamation, Congress passed the first Confiscation Act, stating that the once an enslaved person escaped the Union lines, the claim of the enslaver had been nullified, but they were not considered a free person in the United States. And now here's the key. By the summer of 1862, African Americans seem to be pushing more towards a war for emancipation. Congress, as you say, passes the second Confiscation Act in July. This act emancipated slaves that came into the lands under Union control, created a flood of people to the north. And then Lincoln sees, Kenzie, this is a really good answer, because for all kinds of reasons. We don't talk about the first Confiscation Act and the second Confiscation Act enough in this class and in American history. It's almost as if in the popular conception of American history, Abe Lincoln sitting around one day in late 1862, early 1863, and then suddenly goes, "Hey, I know what'll do it. I'll emancipate the slave." You know, it's not that clear. And by the way, one of the reasons Lincoln is able to feel somewhat confident that his Emancipation Proclamation won't get a lot of trouble from Congress is because these confiscation acts have shown that the opinion in Congress is leaning that way. Anyway, okay. So anyway, as you know, as we all know, and as Kenzie says, the Secretary of State says, wait for a decisive Union victory to release the Emancipation Proclamation, which is what Lincoln does. I wouldn't say, and nobody would say, that the Battle of Antietam is a decisive Union victory, but that's the way they spun it. Okay, and this helped get the Emancipation Proclamation passed and also get it to become accepted. I'm just looking over the side here because of the chat. Sorry about that. Brendan, I wish you folks would your mics work or whatever. Okay. Brendan's saying a lot of things here about the sort of attitudes towards emancipation in general. And why would the Confederates not let the slaves go? It's pretty clear that Confederates would rather die than, well, I suppose they wouldn't rather die. They ultimately surrender, but they'll fight as far as they can to preserve slavery. Okay. And then this key sentence at the end, what Brandon's written, the Emancipation Proclamation sparked some, well, brave and courageous people to fight the good fight and do what they could to abolish slavery in America. It was surprising to people at the time that emancipation could have so much backing. You know, that again, as I say tirelessly, but probably tediously, Julia Ward Howe writes the Battle Hymn of the Republic. People start getting the moral fervor for abolition. Churches play a huge role in promoting abolition and the morality of abolition from the pulpit. And the war gets a sort of moral purpose. War from the North gets a moral purpose, a stronger moral purpose. But one of the interesting things is that you've got two moral purposes now fighting against each other. The South, remember, believes that slavery is morally good, and so that's the fighting over the morality of that is the key from then on. And then Josh answers the crucial thing. The 13th Amendment was officially out of the Constitution on December 6, 1865. This abolished slavery in the states. Finally, okay, it was ratified. Enough states had ratified it by December 6th, 1865, that it came into place. Now, we've just had this year the addition of a federal holiday that is supposed to celebrate the end of slavery. What was that? What's this new holiday? Well, it's not new holiday. The idea is the event has been around for 160 years. But why is it now a federal holiday? What is it? Do you remember this from the summer? I guess it was, maybe early fall.
Is it Juneteenth?
Yeah. Okay. Do we know what Juneteenth really was?
Not until I read the chapter, to be honest with you.
Well, what is it? Because for the rest of time, people are going to say Juneteenth is the day slavery ended in the United States. But is that true, Sam?
No, that's not exactly true.
Yeah.
I think it was when it was what was it? The Emancipation Proclamation is what they reference to as Juneteenth, like when that came out. And or am I wrong about that?
You're wrong about that, but go ahead. Maybe you're conflating two different things. Go keep talking about what you want to say.
It was to oh wait. Okay, so the Juneteenth holiday thing was I think it was somewhere in the South. There was a state that celebrated the freedom of the slaves things, and I think it became an official holiday because of that, but I can't remember where it came from in the book. So
Okay,
sorry
this
about
is
that.
essentially this is the day that slaves are proclaimed free in Texas. Okay. Now, I should say the announcement. See, then the reason I'm going on about these dates and these times and these three different things that happened: Emancipation Proclamation, Juneteenth, and then December 6th, 1865, is because, you know, it shows the difficulty in actually emancipating the slaves. So Lincoln emancipates the slaves in January, the slaves in certain Confederate areas in January of 1863. But that doesn't actually become, you know, the Confederacy can ignore it mostly. Then on when a large part of East Texas is captured by the Union Army, they issue a military order on June 19th to put the emancipation into effect in Texas. And that's what it was originally called Freedom Day, and then everything else. So it really has to do with Texas, but it is symbolic of how, you know, the Emancipation Proclamation is just an idea, really, until the military is able to enforce it. And this is the case in almost all states until December 6th, 1865. So if you were absolutely dying to know what my personal opinion about what date should be celebrated as the end of slavery, I'm for December 6th, 1865, because that's when it was official and countrywide. But, you know, Juneteenth is fine too. It's just that people, well, it'll be another example of us getting something slightly wrong, except that the implications of that are completely are very, very important. Okay. But I'll go to my grave being a nitpicker over that one. All right, who else had this question? Because I again turned it into a sort of a lecture. I didn't mean to do that. Mackenzie, you're here, right? No, Cassie's here. Cassie, are you in this group? Oh, crap. I'm losing my mind here because my windows are going nuts everywhere. Cassie, you're here. You're in this group, aren't you? What else have you got to add? Maybe you're not there. Okay. All right. So don't forget, it's very, very complicated. It takes a very long time. It happens at different times in other places, in different places in the South. And for us to just say, boom, this is the end of slavery, is a little bit difficult. I have to just let me pause for a second. There's some ruckus going out in my front yard involving the trash collectors. I'm just going to take 2 minutes and see what's going on and fix it. Hang on. Sorry about that. Thank God it wasn't my trash cans, but someone was pounding on my door about it. And anyway, I can't wait to get back in the classroom. I thought that I liked this teaching online stuff, but I generally prefer the classroom. All right. So this is the end of slavery is complicated. Let me just say one more thing about Juneteenth, just because I'm on the subject. Anytime there's a holiday promoted or proposed, or anytime there's a statue erected, or almost anytime some historical thing is being celebrated or observed, it almost always says more about the people of the time who are doing the campaigning for the observation of a holiday or the erecting of a statue or whatever. It says more about the people of that time than it does about the actual historical event. So Juneteenth really came about because there were activists in Texas who wanted it a state holiday first, and that didn't get anywhere in Austin. So they started moving this into a larger thing. So when people come to study Juneteenth years hence, they'll be studying that movement, which is very interesting. Okay. So I don't want to say it's arbitrary how we come up with these dates, but it isn't straightforward. Just let me give you one example, just because I love to hear myself talk. Don't forget, all the founders who were involved with the Declaration of Independence thought that July 2nd would be the date celebrated as Independence Day, because that's the day that the Declaration was approved by the Second Continental Congress, and that's it was printed on July 4th. That's why it's not an error. It's somehow crept in and printed on July 4th. But John Adams and everyone else are going around to the whole social sphere saying, get ready, next year, July 2nd, we're going to have a big national party. And so we would have, if that for some reason that date had stuck rather than July 4th, we would be celebrating the 2nd of July every year. Again, nitpicky, but it shows that things aren't, necessarily preordained. All right, that's enough of that. How did the Civil War transform American government? Remember, this question is about American government.
I can go.
Okay.
All right, so I try to go for the less obvious things because I thought that I was going to be in the 230 class. So I broke it up into financial, laws, and production. The financial part of it is because they issued greenbacks, and there was a concern for inflation, and because during the Revolutionary War, they printed paper money and inflation went rampant. So many people were concerned that going into like just paper bills, there's going to be counterfeits, inflation's going to rise exponentially. We didn't really have a successful time with paper money.
Right.
So this is one of the first times that we actually had a decent success with it. Like, let's see, the price of bread around then was about 5 cents, and it only went up to 9 cents in the North compared to like $4.50 in the South. So we had a big success in terms of keeping inflation in check. The second thing I think was issuing of bonds. Normally, how we finance wars is we borrow from other countries and sometimes borrow from banks, but this time we issued bonds. And basic idea of bonds is an IOU from the government. And that was not really attempted before the Civil War. So this was also new, and it borrowed from just ordinary people. And it was very unique in that form, because borrowing from ordinary people, you have to give them something, some type of return. And America had to expect that, well, we're not gonna have this war like a decade from now. So let's keep these bonds far away so we are able to recover and then have that boost to pay it back. So ultimately, we still have those today, and that transformed the government's financial thing for like ever. We still use these today.
Yeah, the government always issues bonds, and especially in wartime. World War I bonds were a big deal. World War II bonds were perhaps even a bigger deal. Well, I know they were a bigger deal. But the government, yeah, this is the first time the government sort of borrows from itself and borrows from its own people. That's a very interesting concept. You're right. It just never goes away. It works enough, or works well enough, that it then becomes the model for government funding of things from extraordinary circumstances. So that was the second thing. You had three things. I forgot what the third one was.
Well, the second one was laws, because they
Oh.
allowed African Americans into the army, so they can actually have a bigger army, but they sanctioned them normally around the border areas, and they didn't get much combat action, just resorted to small tasks and stuff like that. Well, building a fort isn't a small task, but like not combat related mostly.
Right.
That was the second point. But the third point was the new workforce. The government was flexible enough to allow women and African Americans into the workforce, and they were able to contract out for new ideas, which is they really put into that. Like, the ironclad, that was like the South utilized the ideas of other people and then bought their ideas so they can mass produce it. And
Mhm.
most of the items from the Civil War was just basically ideas that the government bought. They just contracted it out. And back to the women and the African Americans in the workforce. With such a short labor supply, they had to be flexible enough to think that women are capable of doing these roles, which wasn't really thought of at the time. And same for the African Americans. So they were the ones that were being the main fuel for the production of of the United States. So that became a very obvious change from before the Civil War to after the Civil War. And that's what I got.
Well, that was a very comprehensive answer, Sam. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad we're recording that, because that's exactly the type of answer that's an A answer, right? Sam breaks it down to the three subtopics, addresses each one, and then more importantly, the key here, and I want to brag about Sam for another second, is this answers the question directly and head on. The Civil War changed America in these three ways. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. That's a very grown-up college way to answer questions. You didn't tell me the background of American finance or the long history of the United States up until the Civil War. Went right after the question and tackled it. Okay, who else has this question here? And sorry, I now may turn Sam into the perfect student. So you'll have to compete against that. Is no one else here? Abigail, Katie? I guess not. So Sam, this is the question you have for your section, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right, finally, why? Noah and I think Andrew's here. Maybe not. Well, why, Noah? Did the Union win the war?
I think the biggest reason why the Union won is because they had all of the supply lines through the railroads, so they're able to keep their troops resupplied relatively often. Whereas the Anaconda Plan really constricted the Confederacy from being able to take in any supplies, be it from inland or coastal ports, and they didn't have access to railways like the Union did.
Yeah, that's absolutely essential. What else? That's always the case with the Union. The Union's always bigger, stronger, better supply lines and stuff. But remember, 61 to 62, things don't go very well for the Union. It looks like they might lose. How do they end up winning? Let's just take the military side, not the supply side.
Well, we had the passing of the First and Second Confiscation Acts, which offered freedom to any escaped slaves that could make it to Union lines, which really helped to boost the number of colored soldiers among the Union's army. Though at the beginning of the Civil War, that was kind of looked down upon,
Yeah.
and they were used not really as like frontline soldiers until later in the war.
Yes, but it was significant. It's a significant change. Yes, it was later in the war, but it was significant in the same way that the addition of American troops in 1918 in World War II helped the Allied side as well. Now, there's another big thing that really is only now, well, only the last 20 years, starting to become championed among historians, and that is the idea that the Union had better generals and actually had a better army for decades and decades and decades. The romantic idea, the whole Gone with the Wind idea, the whole lost cause crap had us all believing that the real brilliant generals were Lee and Stonewall Jackson and all those people. And it turns out that the more you study, the more the military studies these things. And by the way, if any of you are interested in military history, the service academies and the places that do military history on a specialized basis, it's incredible the amount of work they put into studying these things. Why certain things were successful and why certain things weren't successful. In many ways, it's almost as if the military are the best analysts in the government. What am I saying? So for a long period of time, people have been saying, damn it, all this Robert E. Lee crap is just not true. He's actually kind of a crappy general. This whole Stonewall Jackson standing there like a stone wall turns out to be, that was a quote about Gettysburg. It turns out to have been a critique from Lee or whoever said it. That damn it, Jackson won't move. Not that he's standing resolute, he's refusing to fight. So we've had our view of generalship and officership and fighting ability and tactical ability and strategic ability in the United States skewed by the lost cause to make us think that all the gallant, brilliant officers were on the South and it was only the industrial machine of the North that crushed the South. Well, it was both. It was both things. Okay. And I think also once Antietam is fought and Gettysburg is lost by the Confederacy, it's pretty clear the Confederacy is never going to be able to break out of its own area and capture anything in the North. And so, it is a matter of time before it is squashed. What else? Sorry, I sort of trampled over you, Noah, there. What else have you got?
Well, this isn't as significant as that, but there were contraband camps along the Union lines where
Yep.
escaped slaves would help out by performing, menial labor like cooking meals, raising fortifications around encampments, also boosting supply lines by helping to lay new railroad tracks, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and what that does is it frees up a lot of other people to do. You when you join the draft, you go in and you train, especially from 62 onwards. You train in military draft, right? But then you might very well be stuck in camp as a cook. You've been trained to shoot a rifle, but then because they need cooks and they need all kinds of other stuff, they put some people who are sort of overqualified into becoming cooks. Well, if you take contraband who haven't been trained as soldiers and you make them the cooks and the saddlers and the people that take care of the animals and all that, then those guys who are at least in theory trained as soldiers could then be moved into regimental lines. And then, of course, as we'll rightly point out earlier, African Americans start to be trained and start to fight for the Union Army. So do I want to say that the Union victory was inevitable? Well, yes, because of all these things we've mentioned, but also if the Confederacy had done, I see Noah, you talked on the discussion chat too. if the Confederacy had been able to exploit its wins early on in 61 and part of 62, I think it would have been very tough for the people in the Union to keep the war going. So, you know, I'm not saying it was absolutely certain, but it was kind of one of these things like World War II. Once Europe is able to stumble, or Britain in Europe, Britain in the Empire are able to hold out between, you know, what it is, May 1940 and early 1942 when U.S. troops start to arrive. From then on, it's pretty clear the war in Europe will be won because the Soviet Union's in and the U.S. is in. But that it'll just take a great deal of time and effort. So the Confederates are kind of like the Nazis in that regard. If they had been able to further capitalize on their initial successes in 1861, as well as in 1940-41, things would have been very, very different. Very, very different indeed. Okay, anything else on that? Okay, well, this has been a good discussion. I'm glad I recorded it because several of your answers were excellent and lengthy. And it'll make a good addition to the stuff that you need to study for assignment 4. Now, this is the last day we're going to meet. So any questions, problems,